Hello everyone and welcome to Bush Nights Smoke Stories. Today I'm standing on Barma country and I recognise the elders past and present of this country, and I'd also like to thank all of the traditional owners of this region and really across Australia for sharing knowledge with me, cups of tea and just a bit of time, as well as a laugh with me and of course with all of the other Bush Heritage staff across the country. For those that don't know, Bush Heritage is one of Australia's largest conservation agencies. We were started by Bob Brown nearly 30 years ago, and now we own 1.2 million hectares of land across every state. That land represents an enormous diversity of habitat type: grassland, desert, woodland, rainforest. But we also partner with like-minded people, and that includes Aboriginal people and farmers, to help them achieve their conservation and cultural goals. Together, we work across about 11.3 million hectares across Australia. Tonight we bring you Smoke Stories. Bush Nights events were born in Melbourne out of a desire to bring the bush into the city through the art of storytelling. And to be honest, because of COVID, but this has just been such a great way of connecting with so many more people, I think we'll continue to do this well and truly beyond the recovery from COVID. We're able to talk to so many people across Australia and really globally now and bring those stories to life across the world. Today's stories are about smoke. They're born out of flame. They're born out of combustion, connection, out of loss and resilience. We've been reminded this year that fire can be and has been really destructive. And my heart goes out to so many people who've lost property and homes and loved ones to the recent bushfire and even bushfires before that. But fire done the right way can be a glorious thing. There's nothing better than spending a weekend out camping with friends and telling stories around the bushfire, and just as you come back and you start to put your clothes into the washing machine, just having one more smell of that campfire smell and remembering the stories that you were telling over the weekend. Fire keeps us warm and it lights the dark. We also know that it regenerates country, and again, managed well, can be a thing that breathes life into the country. Tonight we'll be hearing stories of that resilience and that life that fire brings. Fire has shaped the evolution of Australia's landscapes and native species over millions of years. It's been managed well for millennia and continues to be an important tool designed by Aboriginal people and used by land managers across the country to breathe that life back into country. Tonight we're going to hear about how fire has shaped this country in the past and gives us scope to think about how to shape it in the future. We're going to be joined by 4 speakers tonight, sharing back-to-back stories of their own experiences with smoke and fire. We'll be hearing from Victor Steffensen, an Indigenous fire practitioner and the author of a recent fantastic book, Fire Country. Alice Bishop, an author from Melbourne who has written a book called A Constant Hum, which explores Black Saturday bushfires. Doug Gimesy, an acclaimed wildlife photographer. And finally, my friend and colleague, Cissy Gore-Birch, Bush Heritage's Executive Manager for Aboriginal Engagement. After each speaker shares their stories, we're going to have a really short period of time, and I apologise for that. It's only 5 minutes for questions, but there will be an opportunity to have questions, so please write your questions into Facebook Live or into the chat function, and we'll try and answer them during the Q&A. But now let's move on to our first speaker, Victor Steffensen. Victor is an Indigenous writer, filmmaker, musician and consultant. He's recently published the book that I mentioned, Fire Country, which is just a great read. The subtitle is How Indigenous Fire Management Could Help Save Australia. This book explores how the revival of Indigenous fire practices could help restore our environment. He's a descendant of the Tagalaga people and through his mother's connections from North Queensland, and he's the co-founder of the Fire Sticks Alliance, the National Indigenous Fire Workshop. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Victor, and for being willing to share your stories with us tonight. If I can hand over to you.
Thank you for that, and it's a real pleasure to be here tonight in Bush Stories and to talk about fire and to talk about smoke. But when we think about smoke, smoke is such an amazing thing. It's not just smoke that comes from fire. Smoke comes in so many different shapes and forms and colors, and has so many different purposes and uses. And smoke itself is used for medicines, for smoke signals, for communication. Smoke can be changed to color, to green, to blue, gray, or white, or black, or even more different colors. It can be changed colors, and those colors signify different messages for different people in neighboring clan groups. And smoke is also used for cooking and up into hollow trees. It's also very important spiritual cleansing uh, for welcoming people to country. But more importantly, the smoke that we see that comes from the country is from the fire, is the white smoke. And that smoke is very special smoke. It comes from the grass. And the grass is a very special vegetation in Australia. And it's so important because it creates um, seed and food and for animals, for people. And grass is the only thing that dies every year compared to other plant lives and trees that continue on living. But grass cure every year, and the cure is for a reason. The cure is to die and to get ready to burn, to bring back fire back on country, the right fire for that place and time. And when we burn that country at that right time, that fire is the right temperature for the soils, and it's burning the grasses only. And the more frequently we burn the grasses, the more better the fire will be, and the cleaner the smoke will become. But the smoke from the grass is a white smoke, and when we burn the grass smoke, it doesn't sting your eyes and it doesn't make you choke, like black smokes from the leaves of trees that hold a lot of chemicals, or the leaf litters and all the rubbish. And so the smoke itself is that when we burn the grass, it comes up white, and it's very mystical and clean, and that goes into the trees and feeds the trees, and the trees bathe in that smoke, and the leaves shimmer and shake as it bathes in the mystic white smoke that comes from our grass. And that smoke itself, it disappears into the atmosphere. It doesn't plume and clog up the skies and create black clouds and that you see from wild bushfires. And that smoke itself, it germinates the leaves and germinates the seeds and the fruits, and helps plants to grow and to germinate. And from there, those trees then they get flowers, and they get honey, and they get seed, and they drop those seeds to the ground. And then the birds will come and eat the honey, and then insects come and eat all the honey, and they are happy. And also the white smoke is also important for the native bee as well, because the native bee don't like smoke, and so it needs to have the cleanest smoke possible when we burn country, so we don't choke him or make it uncomfortable for him. So that white smoke is so important, and it only comes from our grass, and for that right timing. And then when we burn the grass grows again, and the seeds are still on the ground after the fire, and the soils and the leaf litters and all the bio mass in the soils aren't destroyed, and it keeps it nice, and the soil's rich and healthy, so that new life can come back even thicker. And so the grass grows for another season, and then the seeds fall again onto the ground, and then the birds come and eat the seeds, and um, other birds come and eat the insects that come and eat the honey. And the smoke is the connection between the grass and the trees. And when we burn the grass, it connects into the trees, and that starts a whole cycle of renewal into that one system. not for the whole country, but just for that one particular ecosystem that belongs to that place. And each grass will be a different type of grass for different soil types that have evolved over thousands of years to create the right grass for the right fire on the right soils in the right country. So such an important thing is smoke and the white smoke. But people don't see that white smoke much anymore. They're looking at old rubbish and old leaf litters and burning the wrong way and the wrong time and burning the canopies and creating smoke that's very horrible. And that is not the right smoke. So working our way to make country healthy, the smoke will become more healthy. And so that's why it's a ultimate goal for us to get back to the point of burning the right fire in the grasses to create the right smoke, so that we are looking after those systems and creating that harmony. And that's our role as people, our role is to create that white smoke and burn that grass at the right time. And that's how people have been playing out their responsibilities for thousands of years. So that responsibility is something that we need to pick up again as humans, and we need to play our role within Mother Nature, because this is our home and this is where we come from. So we must have a role to play. And that is why Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous practice is so important, because it reminds us and reactivates who we are, not just as Aboriginal people, but as who we are as people as a whole, and remind us as what are our connections to the land and what are our responsibilities. And it's really important that we're aware of all that. But the recent smokes in the summer fires, they were horrible smoke, poison smoke. And that smoke came from plastics in the bush, and came from tires from motor cars and houses that burnt down, and man-made products, and people throwing rubbish and dumping it in the bush, housing products and all sorts of car bodies, and all that rubbish that people carelessly threw into the bush soon found its way into their lungs. And the smoke that they were coming into Sydney, into a city, was just a horrible smoke. And that smoke traveled all the way to the north and other places where the fire didn't travel. And it was a warning. It was a smoke that told us it was not the good smoke. And that smoke is a yellowy, grey smoke. And it mists and covers the air. And it makes a real silence in the atmosphere. And that smoke carried the ashes of all the animals. That smoke carried all the rubbish that human made. It carried all the houses that were burnt down. It carried all the sorry and the sickness, and that the fact that it was a language from the country telling us that we're not looking after the land. And that smoke settled on the kitchen tables in all of the houses in the big city of Sydney. And people couldn't breathe properly, and complaining. And it was just really sad to see. And so expectations, what we need to be doing in the future is improving that smoke quality, and improving it by improving the health of our land and burning the right vegetation so that the smoke is healthy. And then we'll be able to experience a cleaner smoke, healthier bushland. But more importantly, people will have a knowledge and understand the stories that come from country that is relevant thousands of years ago and is still relevant today. Thank you. That's my story for tonight.
That's just wonderful. Thank you so much, Victor. And I have to say, it's just great to meet you, and fantastic to read your book. The Black Summer fires were devastating for so many reasons, and really broad scale impact, as you've mentioned. You know, people all the way in Sydney had really hard breathing air. We had ash falling on our deck. People in Canberra had it hard. Of course, the most hard hit are the ones who've lost property and homes and loved ones. One of the great things coming out of this, though, I think, is the elevation of Aboriginal knowledge and the understanding that we need to bring that knowledge into our fire management. Can you tell me about some of your experiences working with governments and various agencies on sharing your knowledge?
Yeah, well, since working with the old people on country, and things have come from leaps and bounds, and it's been really amazing, the amount of people. Even just, I'm talking before the wildfires that recently happened. People have been coming to so many workshops, and it's just been a real generosity that's come from Aboriginal people to share their knowledge broadly. And the reason why I want to share that knowledge is because it's crucial, and it's all about sharing and looking after our country. And where people, whitefellas, are all part of this land as well. And the main concern for Aboriginal people is to look after that country and for people. And when we look after country, we look after ourselves, and we see that holistically for everyone. And that's been amazing, the journey with that. And so many people are on board now, from pastoralists and all walks of life. And it's such a great thing to see that people can see the benefits of the Indigenous knowledge, not just from how Aboriginal people used fire before the settlements, but also how that's still relevant today, and how that fire fits into regenerative um, practices to revive landscapes, and it fits into livelihoods and agriculture, and it fits into just the man living down the road that was waiting for that improved smoke, and knows to be patient as the land gets healthier. But when it comes to government, we've still got a long way to go. Yeah, but there has been some yarns, and there has through the Royal Commission, I guess. But we're still waiting for to see what happens. But I'd like to thank all the philanthropists and communities and all the people out there that are really making a difference on the ground, and that's what's really made the difference to this point, and will continue on into the future.
That's fantastic, Victor. And again, I'm sure everybody would like to give you a vote of thanks for all the work that you're doing, and that generosity and graciousness that you speak about with Aboriginal people. I find that over and over again, and it's somewhat staggering, given the history of this country, how generous Aboriginal people are in sharing their knowledge and just wanting the right outcome, not just for people, but for country as well, knowing that they're absolutely intrinsically linked and tied. And lovely to hear that you've got great response from people on the ground. And Bush Heritage will be pushing for you. I know lots of other people are pushing for you to have that voice at government as well, and to have the ear and change a few minds, because it's, I think, what you've got to say in the book is just fantastic. Is that why you wrote the book? To have that broader audience?
That's right. Well, I wrote the book to help the process, and to and to also close a chapter. Like, that was me and the Mole people, and I needed to write that book for them as well. And but more
Yeah.
importantly, it was to get the whole picture out there and to get the whole story. Because when people look at fire, they look at one little concept, and they don't realize how it's connected to everything, not just in all our issues that we have in a modern sense, but also with the entire landscape in an ancient and natural sense as well. And people need to know the whole picture and need to think holistically about the subject. And that's why I wanted to write Fire Country. And I, it was especially directed at young people, because this is going to take generations to heal this landscape. And if anything that our generation can do now, our older generations, is to start that process for those young people and give them a pathway to follow. And I don't want to see them lost in the future, and I don't want to see them protesting and getting hurt. I want to see them with knowledge and happiness, and a positive way forward.
Well, that's great. Thanks again. And it is a fantastic story. Fire Country is just one of the best fire stories, fire-driven stories I've read. It's really wonderful. So thank you so much for the book, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. Lovely to meet you.
Thanks. It was a
Thanks.
pleasure, and thanks, Bush Heritage.
Pleasure. So up next we have Alice Bishop. Alice is a writer from Melbourne who was recently named Sydney Morning Herald Best Young Australian Novelist for 2020. Her book, A Constant Hum, tracks the lingering hardships of bushfire aftermath. And she began writing it after her family were personally affected in the Black Sunday bushfires in 2009. She's joining us from her family home in Christmas Hills now. Welcome, Alice, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a real joy to be here. And firstly, it's really important that I acknowledge that I'm on Wurundjeri land and on the land of people that have lived through tens of thousands of years of fires before I called this place home. It's a place in Christmas Hills, which is about an hour northeast of Melbourne. And thank you again to Victor. I'm hugely in awe of your work, and I'm in awe of all the work that Bush Heritage does and continues to do. To say I'm in awe is an understatement, to be honest. But smoke stories, when it comes to my writing, I have been working on stories about fire and smoke and loss and regrowth for probably a bit over 10 years, so 12 years coming up to that time since 2009. I started writing A Constant Hum, my collection of short fiction, when I was 22 and standing in the strangely snowy ash and twisted tin of our family home. It took weeks to wash the smell of the chemical smoke that Victor's talking about, of burned installation and melted green bins and our own house and the lives of many people and animals, from our clothes and from our cars and from the creases of our skin and our eyelashes. And I think about that a lot to this day. I think about all the years that people are struggling from these recent fires in Black Summer. And I think I wrote my book to really show that once the media turns away, it can be many years before people can start telling their own stories of smoke and recovery. But back to our house. So the house I'm sitting in tonight was rebuilt in 2012. It took about 15 minutes for the original house to burn through in its entirety. From about 5:45 to 5:59 p.m. on the 7th of February in 2009. About the time it takes to maybe make a fancy cup of coffee. And that was, it was burned down from the East Kilmore fire. So a fire that burnt through almost 250,000 acres of bush. Part of that, some of that land was heavily grazed paddocks, open woodland, large blue gum and pine plantations. Our house ran onto an abandoned pine plantation, which didn't help. But more seriously, the majority of people who died, there was 119 people who died in that fire, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, friends and colleagues, died in unimaginably scary ways, in bathtubs, in cars, fleeing, on the phone to loved ones, with the line going flat. But my goal, my own smoke stories, has been, when talking about these moments of horror, I've always wanted the quieter moments of bushfire and bushfire aftermath to be seen, to shine through and to be taken notice of, because I think we have a lot to learn. I don't kind of want to carry on in the tradition of the mainstream media's sensationalist stories when it comes to bushfire. Maybe it's the image of a man on his roof with a tinny and a hose. He's always a white man. Or it might be the image of a mandarin-coloured coat on the back of a CFA volunteer feeding a thirsty koala water. Or a woman, an older woman, making white bread sandwiches for the CFA. A woman, another really prominent image I think I saw reflected back after Black Saturday, was the woman in the dam huddling in protecting her children. These are some of the stories of bushfire, and they're important ones, but they're not the only stories. And when told without the other stories, they reinforce the damaging gender roles, the very white-centric narratives of bushfire in this country. Through the stories in my book, A Constant Hum, I wanted to write about the feeling unlike anything I'd ever felt before when we saw the first blue wren return after months of all the birds and the colours disappeared. It's that silent atmosphere that Victor mentioned, of that yellow smoke, the dangerous smoke, and the quiet, the kind of eerie quiet after bushfire that after severe bushfire that really haunts you. I wanted to write about more the kind of long-term effects of bushfire, and my parents worrying about how they'd pay for the new house, and the bureaucracies of rebuilding after bushfire, and the quiet discussions that I heard my parents have, 1 year on and 2 year on, if we should even return. I wanted to write about the rained-on rust colours of the bush and after fire, and how it kind of became a new home to me. I wanted to write about women's strength after bushfire, so often unnoticed and unrecognised, but so often relied upon when things go very wrong. About older women's strength in particular as well. They're not just making white bread sandwiches for the CFA, they're often pillars of the community, holding people up by unpaid emotional labour. I wanted to write about how the bush stories given space in this country often show the very ingrained gender roles white Australia is built upon, and how we really need to change those ideas. But I do have hope that things are changing. Sitting with my dad recently on the deck of our rebuilt house, we were talking about the bushfire narratives that we saw after kind of Black Summer reflected in the news. My dad's someone who fled our house at the last minute. You see our house there on screen now. He saw unimaginable things when fleeing, burning bodies and burning cars. My mum, she was there having that conversation on the deck as well. My mum is one of those women who really held us up after bushfire. She was a nurse in the aftermath of Black Saturday and was helping people as our house burned down. A nurse with the quiet strength and selflessness that qualities of women in bushfire that aren't celebrated maybe as much as the ashy-cheeked CFA volunteer or the images that we so often see. But as we were talking, I think there's a new depth to the stories that we're telling in this space, as Victor and other people tonight are going to show. Doug, with his photojournalism, shows that image of the koala, the thirsty koala, is not one that's just easily consumed and forgotten about, but through Instagram, we can see through new media the longer tail of these events. We are haunted by the image of the woman after the Black Summer fires taking off her shirt to console the wailing koala. There is also an anger about climate change after these wasn't there after that, and as we were talking about before, there is now a mainstream attention drawn to Indigenous leadership, so often sidelined by the dominant media in the past. Into women's stories, kids' stories of trauma, and not just celebratory images of kids getting new bikes from the Red Cross tent. But we're working together, broadening the broken, this dominant bushfire narrative of this country, which has already caused so much pain. I hope my connection is okay, but I'm going to actually close by reading a small excerpt from A Constant Hum, my collection of short stories I was talking about earlier, and it's called Coppering. Coppering. You remember mostly they found in clusters, mostly in fillings and tires trickled like snowy earth, silvers, gunmetal greys, and blacks so petrol pretty you'd think of a currawong's wing. of a bush pigeon's neck, rainbow flecked. Some people were consoled afterwards by the thought that the neighbours left together, their air conditioners whirring, their hearts hummingbird humming as they ran. We were comforted afterwards that things ended for them together, holding each other under betadine and copper-coloured smoke, under a sky that had once promised kinder things, maybe Vegemite toast on a Sunday morning, maybe a sneaky weeknight after work kiss. The neighbours never hoped it would end up shining and smoky like this. But you remember, mostly 4 a.m, they found them in clusters, mostly silvers, metal grey, blacks, so petty. You'd think of a curling, of a bush pigeon's neck, petrol flecked. And that's me for tonight. Thank you so much for having me.
Just fantastic. Thank you so much for reading that, and thank you so much for writing the book. I think, as you said all the way along, it just brings a completely new perspective to people's thinking about bushfire and how to live through it. And the first thing I wanted to say was really thank God you and your family did get out and you were able to escape and get out safely. So I know that's a mixed blessing, but you know, we're very happy that you did. I wanted to ask about that new perspective. You wrote your book 10 years after the fires, and wondered how your perspective changed, I guess, over that time, and if that helped you write the book, having that distance.
Yeah, I think the first couple of years, I was 22 during Black Saturday. The first couple of years was very difficult for me to process, and I wrote a lot of really sensationalist stories about the fire, and I think having that distance from the actual event also gave me a lot of more of an ability to write through the longer, the aftermath stories of bushfire that so often go undocumented. So relationships breaking down because of domestic violence that's increased because of bushfire. There are stories of hope as well, stories of people deciding after 6 years that they can come back. Just those small stories about the bureaucracy of rebuilding, of judgment, of how the climate change narrative has evolved. I think having that space to kind of live through that and then put it into a book as I went along has made it what it is, I guess. And I really hope my next book doesn't take that long. But yeah, I'm happy that it all wove together in the end. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. I have too many questions, so I'm actually going to blend two into one.
Yeah, sure.
We're all, a lot of us are dealing with COVID right now and being locked down. Whether that has changed since the Black Sunday fires, but whether that has added to resilience, you know, the relationship between resilience and nature. I guess I feel like you'd have something really important.
But if I gathered a little bit from that question, sorry, it cut out a little bit. The resilience in nature. Sorry. No, for me, I think I've learned so much from watching the ridge I grew up on, the bush regrow, and I've also learned, coming back to what Victor said too, is that these extreme firestorms aren't necessarily part of the natural landscape. It's almost 12 years on now, and the country up here is really scarred. And for me, that's made me care a lot more about things like climate. It's really exciting to see people take on more of a kind of mainstream interest in land management, Indigenous land management. I think resilience is an overused word with our politicians, and it's one that I tend to shy away from these days because of that. But there's also a great privilege to still be alive and to be able to see that once in a lifetime strange beauty and the constant hum of the bush regenerating, as much as there's also a great sadness to that. So it's taught me a lot about time and how maybe insignificant we are as humans. So yeah, it's been a really special thing and a painful thing, but also a hopeful thing as well. So, yeah.
That's just really fantastic. Thank you so much, Alison. And again, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us tonight and sharing those stories.
Thank you for having me so much. Thanks.
Pleasure. So our next speaker will also be talking about perspective. It's Doug Gimesy. Doug's a photojournalist who focuses on conservation, wildlife and animal welfare. You may have seen some of his work documenting the Black Summer bushfires, where he was on ground witnessing the devastation firsthand. Tonight, he's sharing some of those stories with us. Doug, thank you again so much for joining us, and it's a great pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for the opportunity. We can go maybe to the first image. I guess if people, have we got the first image up? Yeah, I mean, I think if people sit back and think, have they ever stood in the middle of the bush in the middle of the day and experienced the absence of sound? No birds, no song, no rustle of leaves, no burbling streams, no creaking of branches or rustling of leaves, or even the air of feel in your face. As a conservation and wildlife and animal welfare photojournalist, I'd never experienced that until this year, standing on that road, the Bruth and Buchan Road in south of Buchan, just in East Gippsland this year. 3 months before the bushfires had hit, I was actually reflecting on the way bushfires were reported as hectares of bush lost. And I've never really liked that frame of bush being lost, because habitat is rarely lost. It's destroyed, it's allowed to be destroyed, and I think that gives a very, very different moral frame. So before the bushfires, I was also thinking about not just the impact to bush per se, but also the way it's framed, where we hear journalists and newspapers talk about how wildlife is perished. And to me, that seemed wrong. If we can just go back to that image, it seemed wrong because sort of something is missing and something's left unsaid about how they died and the pain and suffering they went through during the bushfires. So I decided when the bushfires hit, and of course we never predicted they would be that significant, to spend 5 weeks in Gippsland covering them, trying to get, I guess, a deeper understanding and more a complete image of both the animal and the human welfare issues that happen during these catastrophic events. And if we look at these 4 photos, what I saw, top left to bottom right, was I saw streams that used to be crystal clear suddenly filled and made shallow with a sludge of ash and soil. I saw wildlife looking for food in a blackened landscape. I had the chance to go into active fire zones with rescue teams and be lifted 100 feet into the air. That's not a drone shot. I've been lifted up by a cherry picker by DELP officers doing health checks on koalas, and I accompanied the police, who were doing a fantastic job flying drones, looking at koalas in trees and looking at their health. I also got some fantastic opportunities, I guess, as a photojournalist. I got to fly in our Royal Australian Air Force Spartan transports for the evacuation of koalas from Malakuta, from flying in to them being carried out and then being taken back to Melbourne Zoo. I think for me, there's some good experiences and some obviously horrific experiences, but what I learnt was some interesting things as a photojournalist. The tactical preparation is incredible. I mean, 3 things there. You need to get your competence and your skills and your certifications in advance. The number of photojournalists who came from overseas expecting to turn up and go into an active fire zone, who hadn't been trained on how to work with fire and the dangers of fire, or had their media accreditation, or even their personal protective gear. We've seen that, I guess, with COVID, where when an emergency like this happens, I couldn't get fire boots for a month, and I had ordered fire boots 4 months beforehand. So those type of things, when you're doing this type of photography, are really, really important. Just those basic tacticals of getting trained, getting accreditation, and getting personal protective skills. The other thing as a photojournalist is, what do you take when you're in the middle of a fire zone? So photographic equipment you're carrying a lot in the field and it's hard and you don't want to change lenses. So, basically I carry 2 cameras. That is it for the photographers out there, a wide zoom 16 to 35 and a 70 to 30, because you don't want to be changing lenses if it's smoke or you're getting into water and things like that. But another thing that is important for me is physical preparation, and it's not really the endurance, but it's balance. And I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but throughout my photography career, I stand on this when I brush my teeth, and I do it with my eyes closed, and I do it on one leg, because when you're in the field and you're in smoke, you need really, really good balance. So it's something a little bit crazy. It's a 1-inch piece of foam from Clark Rubber, but training to have balance so you don't fall in the field, because sometimes I'm out there on my own. And I have a GPS locator and I have a portable radio, but if I fall and hurt myself when I'm on my own, that is not a good situation. The other thing is about building relationships, and some of those photos you would have seen, the Malakuta photos, you just don't get onto an aeroplane like that. They've come from building relationships long term with people who are fantastic. And I want to give a shout out to Delp, who allowed me to get into these situations, to get onto Air Force planes. That's so important. You can't, again, just turn up and expect people to respect you or want to help you. So relationships are really important. Something that I think I'm going to get asked a question about is clearly defining your role. And that sounds obvious as a photographer, but it's really difficult, because when you're there, do you capture the situation, or do you see something happening and put down your camera and try and help? And I'll leave that for a question, as I'm sure I'll get it, but that is always a problem. And you think, is the photo I'm going to take be more impactful to save a broader number of animals and animal welfare issues than helping that animal? So that is tough, and that's something you struggle with. And I think another really important thing, and both people before were talking about people, it's, for me as a wildlife and conservation and animal welfare photographer, people might think it's all about wildlife. I would say 60% of my images are about people. It's as much about people. Jeremy on the left, seeing for the first time what happened when his home was destroyed after the bushfire. Rena on the right with 3 orphan grey kangaroos whose house was burnt down and evacuated from the Wallaby Wildlife Shelter. Wildlife carers and CFA rescuers, Lynn Button on the left, and then Lorna on the right. These stories all very much about wildlife and what people do, but it's very much about the people. And even looking at Joe again, Rena's partner from the Wallaby Wildlife Centre, a different Joe this time, whose house was actually saved because when the power grid went down in Sarsfield, he had solar panels and he had solar batteries, and his water pumps could continue to work. And that is his house 2 weeks after bushfires went through and everything else was destroyed. Or Kay at the bottom, who was off grid, and he's there sitting in his caravan. Sadly, when I caught up with him, he's looking out where it started to rain and everything had been destroyed, except his caravan. And that was probably the last thing he wanted to be saved, rather than his house. And then again, the Victorian Police using infrared imagery to find koalas, so then forest and wildlife officers could go out and help them. So conservation issues are always, or most of the time I should say, caused by people, but also fixed by people. And so I think it's really important to cover people. And I think the other thing that caught me a little bit unaware, but I should have known better, is the emotional preparation. This photo is of a Fijian engineer who came to Australia with the Fijian army to help us, and a fantastic bunch of people. They just so nice, and they allowed me into their prayer session. But the emotional preparation is, you know, it's going to be tough when you're photographing this type of event. But I think I'm lucky that I can partially become comfortably numb. But when you get back, it's really important as a photojournalist to realise you're covering a lot of negative emotional impact, which is going to have an impact on you, but also the type of impacts. I am comfortable to say I came back and I was really upset, and I couldn't figure out why, because I'd seen all these animals hurt and all these people's houses destroyed, and I just wasn't sure what it was, but that was vicarious trauma. So I learned. So something to be really be aware of the trauma that you feel when other people undergo that trauma. So I guess my final point really is, from all of this, covering all this and showing the negative imagery, it's always also important to put hope in those images, because otherwise, what's the point? Whether it's epicormic growth or rescued koalas being released, yellow-tailed black cockatoos nibbling banksia seeds, or Emily from Goongra, who is now living in the city looking after her wombats in ISO. I think whilst covering the negative is important and bringing it back to wildlife is important, showing not only issues about the wildlife but the people, because it's the people who are going to fix these things and also the people who cause these issues. And I think that's really important as photojournalists. We cover both, but leave with some hope.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Doug. I totally agree, and that's something that we've learned as well, that you can't just tell all the bad stories, because people seem to switch off. Do you think there's such a thing as too much of the negative, and how do you focus on that in the midst of a disaster when, okay, hope might be there, but by God, it's out of focus? How do you find that?
Well, look, I guess the type of photography I do, it's very human based, and so I look for the Emilys and the Joes and the people who are doing something to make a difference. Whether it's even the firefighters or DELP or the people who are giving away free coffees. I think once the scene is set as a photographer, once you've shown that one or two burnt koala photos, the rest is then about what's being done to help them or what's being done to hinder their help, whether it's a conservation issue or whether it's an animal welfare issue. And I think that sometimes gets mixed up. We sometimes focus a lot on the conservation issues, but when we hear 3 billion animals perished, what we're saying is 3 billion animals burnt to death. And that's a massive animal welfare issue. And whilst that's horrific, there are so many people working to make a difference, either to prevent it in the future or to deal with those. Melbourne Zoo is a great example. Deal with the suffering and the pain and help those that they can. So there's always good people doing good things, but there's always silly people doing silly things, and we've seen that with COVID as well.
Yeah.
That was me being.
Do you stay in touch? Well done.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I'm nearly, not close friends, but virtually with everyone. I could send them a text and say I'm coming, and most of them would say, would you want to crash at my place, or let's catch up for a coffee, because you're with them during intense times. And it's I generally don't ever go in and take a photo for 5 minutes. I'll spend 2 or 3 days there, or I'll go back multiple times, which not bothers, and they're very tolerant. But my autobiography is going to be called Bugger Nearly, because I take a photo and it's just not. Emily, I've been back with the wombats. I've been back to her place 3 times. I thought, I forgot to take that photo. So over that time, you build a relationship, and people are very tolerant. But I've got all their mobiles. They've got my mobile. So I'd say 95%, I'd say, are strong acquaintances, if not good friends.
That's fantastic. And just super quickly, because we are running out of time, what are your top tricks for dealing with that trauma? How do you deal with that?
I have a counsellor. I have one proactively. I was there at 8:30 this morning, and I catch up every couple of weeks, and I talk through these things. It sounds really silly, but we set up the swag out the back because we're in ISO, and for our 2 cats. And I got them the swag, and I smoke, and that was the swag I used during the bushfires, and it all came flooding back, because that's what I slept in when I was out there. So I think it's to be aware of the type of emotional trauma you can go through when it comes back, and be really honest and candid and open about it, and talk to people and go, look, I do get vicarious trauma. I sometimes get compassion fatigue, and I'm aware of it, and that's okay. It's because then you can deal with it. Well, I'm lucky enough that I can anyway. And I have a great
fantastic
partner.
And
he's very tolerant.
there you go. That's
important one.
That is an absolute key. Well done. Very diplomatic. You see, that was twice you were diplomatic. Well done.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for joining us tonight, Doug. And I think a lot of people will be looking. Do you have a website?
Yeah, I do. It's just my last name, Gimesy, or Instagram is probably the most visual part, Doug_GIMESY. And I don't post everything, and Instagram sometimes images are a bit too small, but if you Google me, you'll find the images on Nat Geo or BBC or something like that as well, hopefully.
That's perfect. No, I think we'll be looking for your images, certainly of truth, but also of hope, because that's exactly right. Without that hope, what's the point? But thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. So finally, our last speaker tonight is, as I said, a friend and colleague of mine at Bush Heritage. Coming from Kununurra, Western Australia, is Cissy Gore-Birch. Cissy is a Jaru Hija woman who grew up on Balangurra country in the East Kimberley. She's always had a passion for country and connection, and she oversees Bush Heritage's Aboriginal Partnership Program. And she says the best part of her job is getting out onto country and sharing stories. I know that everyone I talk to when I talk about Cissy and that she's part of our organisation, they all say we're very lucky to have her, and we're extraordinarily lucky to have her tonight. So welcome, Cissy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Beck. Thanks for the introduction. I think before I start, I'd also like to acknowledge the country that I stand on tonight is the Mirrong country up in Kununurra, so they are the traditional owners of this land. And thank you for this opportunity, sharing my story and my journey when we talk about fire and when we talk about smoke, and I guess sharing my role and responsibility within Bush Heritage and working across the nation with our Aboriginal Partnerships Program. I guess when you think about fire, it's something that you sort of think about right through your life as a child, but also as an adult and as an employee, and what role and responsibility we all play in this important sector, and how do we look after country. And as we've seen right across the nation, the devastation that the fire has left, that's put a lot of, I guess, and questions in regards to the way we manage country currently and the way decisions are being made. And, something I've learned along the way is, how do you actually define right way fire? And when you look at the different systems within this country and the governance and the decision making around conservation and land management, Aboriginal people have never really been a part of those planning and conservation and making decisions in regards to conservation and land management only until just recently. And Aboriginal people have been given the opportunity again to return back to country through native title rights, the land rights movement up in Northern Territory, and settlement agreements down in the southeast and southwest regions, and through settlement with the state government in a number of areas within the nation. So these opportunities have really allowed Aboriginal people to take ownership of managing country and to have access to funding to be able to have rangers employed to return to country and to be able to undertake some of their roles and responsibilities in looking after what's important and our assets in conservation and land management, but looking at our cultural assets. And I guess when I think about it as a child, some really fond memories come back to me in regards to what fire meant for me. And I guess when you're a child, you don't really think about what that means. It's sort of taken as for granted, but when you sit around a fire as a child, you're surrounded by family, you're surrounded by elders telling stories. So it brings out all these opportunities and sharing, the old time stories, but also it's a really important time to come together. So fire plays a really important in Aboriginal people's lives, from thousands and thousands of years ago to where we are today. It's a connection, and it's something that should be respected. And I guess looking at, you hear some of the old people talking about some of the fires that have happened over in the southeast and southwest, the hot fires, and, take into consideration a lot of these have lost a lot of country and their assets and properties, but also looking at it from an Indigenous perspective. Aboriginal people have lost access to a lot of that country and weren't able to get back on country to be able to practice their their rights as Indigenous people or First Nation people, until just lately, listening to the stories of what Victor was sharing, recently about the whole movement now and looking at right way practices and the roles and responsibility that each and every one of our agencies play is really important. So whether you're a philanthropic organisation or a state government or a national organisation or an individual or an employee of an organisation, everybody has a role and responsibility in fire. And it's the way we do it and the way we communicate the importance of coming together as a nation to be able to address this for the betterment of our future and our future generations. So I guess some of the memories that come back to me in regards to fire was a story I shared in regards to smoking. So our grandparents would say, okay, you've got a sports carnival coming up, we really need to get you here to smoke your legs, to be able to give you the strength to be able to run faster. And as a child, I guess growing up, that's something that we believed in. So here we are lining up, for our grandparents to smoke our legs. So we're getting stung with all the leaves and the smoke and thinking, yes, we're going to win today. And we actually won. So some of these things, I guess we believed in, but not knowing our own abilities and the way we run and the athleticism that Aboriginal people have. And, we had smoking ceremonies. We had smoking in homes when there was a death. So I experienced a lot of that culturally, and having that ability and opportunity to experience as was, I guess, an experience that we took for granted that today are still being practiced. So it's wonderful to see those practices still continuing in some of these areas. And it's a really important, sacred practice that Aboriginal people don't take lightly. And, the different smokes, we talked about the role and responsibility of the smoking and the fire and the regrowth, and Aboriginal people have managed and adapted these practices over a long time through observation, through natural phenomena like the lightning and causing hot fires, but to be able to adapt the landscape to where it was once upon a time when it was really well managed. When Aboriginal people were taken off country, you can see the impacts of that and what happened. There was a lot of hot fires, and now going back to having access to country through our native titles has really empowered people again to take ownership on returning back to country. So I guess within my role with Bush Heritage Australia, I have the opportunity across a number of all of our Aboriginal Partnerships program, undertaking fire as a key target in management, but also, the cultural values and the cultural responsibilities that each and every one of our partnerships have. To be able to witness a part of it is a great privilege for us as individuals, but also as Bush Heritage to be a part of making this impact partners, Aboriginal people, and also acknowledging the importance of right way practices. And within Bush Heritage, this is something that we are working deep to right way approaches and the way we work with our partnerships. And within the fire management practices, this is something that we need to really be thinking about as a nation, is really looking at the importance of the cultural values, the cultural practices that our people have been working on country and managing fire for a very long time, and to be able to look at the Western science on how do we actually bring that together to complement the work that we all need to do in a respectful manner, and to really understand the importance of fire. Fire needs to be respected, and the way we do fire, the way we govern fire through decision-making processes need to be respected, and also making sure that everybody has a completely an understanding and respect for Indigenous knowledge. And right now it's a proof that our governments are calling upon our Indigenous practitioners, our fire practitioners and our fire managers to be at the table. But, this is something that we need partners right across the nation to continue to push and to be able to help and support this journey in the way we do fire right across this nation. And also the importance of how important it is and that we need to show respect on a daily basis, and not to be fearful of fire, but to understand what fire really means and to be able to do it the right way. Thanks, Beck.
That's perfect, Cissy. Thank you so much. That's really great. I know you have so many stories of traditional owners of Aboriginal people showing leadership, both at a government level, at NGOs, and just in the public space. Do you have a story that you'd like to share with us of someone that's just really doing a fantastic job in demonstrating that leadership?
I mean, I don't have, I guess, of someone who's of an individual, but I know for a fact, just, I guess, being in the industry now for the last 10 years, up in the northern part of Australia, as an adult and being a part of conservation and land management, what I've witnessed across northern Australia, fire management practices has been around for some time. And there are good stories that come out of the fire practices up here with the Indigenous Carbon Network right across Northern Australia is bringing into consideration all the different policies and legislation, but, you know, of the Indigenous people and our rights, and looking at, I guess, the carbon projects and how we manage that to make sure that we get the outcomes from a conservation and land management aspect, but also from an economic development perspective, to be able to use the tool to manage country, to manage our cultural values, but at the same time to be able to gain income through cool burns and managing the hot fires, to make sure that we don't actually have the hot fires, but to manage that effectively. And then there's a better outcome, and it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Yeah, that's perfect. You have said a couple of times that the best part of your job is getting out onto country, usually with your kids or with other people, and just getting deep into the bush. Can you tell us about your last trip out into the bush?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we try and get our kids out on country every school holidays when we can, or even on the weekends. And just recently we went back up on country on the Carson River track, and, you know, it's pretty rough on the country. It takes about 4 hours to travel about 10 Ks. So we were talking about really rugged country. And this is, I guess, a great example in regards to access to country, and just knowing and sharing the experiences of what our old people have gone through, and the way they manage country in a way that was really effective. And when I take my kids back to share some of these stories of our old people walking through this country and managing it and owning it, you know, they become so excited about the whole idea. It's like, whoa, can you just imagine, you know, if our old people were alive today? And, you know, it's something that we always think about, and it's something that I'll continue to take on with my children and share with them, and hopefully one day that they would become specialized practitioners in land management and looking after their country also.
That's perfect. You didn't smoke their legs or anything, did you?
No, I didn't smoke their legs. We did do a welcome and acknowledgement, and, you know, we sit around the fire, and, you know, it's always a quiet moment and of self-reflecting, and, you know, it's a special time of the day when you're sitting around the fire and giving people that headspace just to feel what's around and to be able to take it in. So it's a really important part of the day.
That's fabulous. Thanks so much, Cissy, and thanks again for taking the time to come and join us tonight. I'd like to thank one last time all of the speakers that have given us such insight into their relationships with fire and smoke and resilience and hope and all of those sorts of things. It has been pointed out that I neglected to introduce myself at the beginning. Sorry, I was a bit nervous at the beginning. My name's Rebecca Spindler, and I'm the Head of Science and Conservation at Bush Heritage. So that's who I have been, and that's who I continue to be. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here tonight on Bush Nights Smoke Stories. Please, if you continue to have questions, either as you rewatch the Facebook Live or as you watch it for the first time, just pop your questions into the comments section, and we'll make sure that the speakers have an opportunity to send an answer. And we might even ask Doug that Dorothy Dixer that he almost asked himself during his speech, and get him to put that up there. If you just hang on for a couple of extra minutes, we do have a fantastic video that is 2.5 minutes and talks very much about the specifics of how our partners deal with fire, how they manage fire, and how they do fire the right way. If you'd like to find out more about bush heritage work, you can visit our website on social media pages. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Twitter, we have the lot. Please, everyone, stay safe, and many thanks again for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. We'll lead into the video.
Fire has the power to harm the land, but also to heal the land. Our people have been listening and watching how fires move across Australia for more than 60,000 years. We have so much to teach the world about how to manage fire. The recent bushfire crisis has been devastating for all Australians. More than 18 million hectares of our country has been burnt. More than 1 billion animals have been impacted by the recent fires. As the original custodians of this land, that really hurts us deeply. Right Way Fire is burning country at the right time, in the right conditions, to encourage regrowth and regeneration. Lots of Australian ecosystems need fire for new life, but it needs to be the right way fire. In a lot of places, we can't do right way fire anymore because we don't have access to country. The cities are getting bigger and most people don't understand fire. As the world gets hotter and drier and our bushfire seasons become more intense, our traditional knowledge will show us a way forward. If fire is done the right way, country will look after us, our plants, our animals, and their habitats.